Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And how could Blizzard do this? How on earth, how could they possibly comprehend doing something like this? They are supposed to only do things that we complain about and get angry about and rage about. How could they possibly do this? They added back pretty much every single piece of utility that I have been wanting returned to Arms Warrior since Warlords of Draenor, pre-Warlords of Draenor, and more. You're going to get all of it back and more. I mean, I don't think there's much you could really ask for. In terms of damage, rotation, and expectations of your rotation, it's still very similar to Battle for Azeroth. It's still quite difficult to generate rage. It's going to be even more so with haste values plummeting, going from the end of the expansion to a fresh expansion. Secondary sets all plummet, so it may be difficult to generate rage. I'm curious to see if we see warriors pairing up with enhancement shamans to get the Wind Fury totem to get more auto attacks for rage generation. I do anticipate that there will be good synergies between those two in particular, especially early on, but its damage rotation is still expected. Some of its cleave potentially reduced, as it has been for basically every melee spec, to limit the amount of targets you can hit with your AoE. And I think this is an attempt to make Mythic Plus trash pools a little bit more engaging and much less about gather as much as you can, stun it, and burst it down before it even gets a chance to do the mechanic it's supposed to do. So you're going to lose out on some potential fun with Bladestorm, but Arms Warrior wasn't really in the top contenders for that. It was always the Outlaw Rogue for most of Battle for Azeroth, Demon Hunter on Holy Death Knight, that were sort of scaling with Gushing Wounds a little bit later on. BM Hunter getting a huge benefit for the Mythic Plus trash pull. So this does bode well in terms of potential for Arms Warrior in terms of its damage per second. But the main point here is for PvE, a lot of the stuff that's coming back to the spec or a lot of the additions aren't on first take. You're like, wow, that's amazing. Like, oh wow, I get Ignore Pain, I get a shield. Like as a PvEer, you probably just never want to press that because it's going to prevent you from doing damage, or other things like potentially switching over to a shield, taunting a boss or a trash mob that might be about to finish your tank, and then saving them in the last second. Now, to me, that's a lot of fun to always just be on edge, like, oh, could I make a play here? Could I try and save somebody? Is something going wrong? Is a necrotic stack a little bit too high? I think that these spells are a really nice addition to the Arms Warrior specialization in terms of its utility, and its defense, bringing back more than just me warrior, me smash. You're going to have a lot more fun. So let's take a look at some of the abilities that are coming back. And again, as I said, these probably have more impact in PvP. It isn't to say that they are totally useless in PvE. The number one spell coming back for me is Intervene. Run at a high speed toward an ally, intercepting all melee and ranged attacks for 6 seconds while they remain within 10 yards. So this was a key ability for mobility. You could use it to get around the map a little bit if you were running out, but when we get to the legendaries, I don't know if you'll even have to worry about that. This was key for intervening potential melee stuns like Kidney Shot, or even intervening critical crowd controls like Blind for a rogue. This was arguably, in my opinion, the highest skill cap ability for the warrior, and it still could prove to have some use in dungeons as well. If you know the trash mobs aren't going to kill you immediately, you could intervene the tank, try and get some extra rage generation from some of the redirected attacks to yourself. So there could be some key usage there, but I am so happy to see Intervene come back for Arms Warrior in general. Ignore Pain was a prot ability. It's just an absorb. You can activate it for some extra rage and reduce some of the damage that you're going to be taking. So Arms Warrior in PvE and PvP was basically known for just not having any sustain in terms of its healing output. I would debate whether or not it was actually necessary that it had it, but it is getting it, and it's getting a lot of it. This is just one of the beginning ends of it. It's very similar to Warlords of Draenor, and I'm spacing out of the name of it. It was similar to Shield Block. You could spend your rage on it to get a little bit of an absorb instead of your damage rotation. So it's nice to see that you can decide between defense and offense a little bit more with the Arms Warrior. And Ignore Pain will just be another addition to that. You could run Shield Block to block all melee attacks against you. I'm interested to see if there are any interactions with this. Let's say if you block a Death Strike, does the Death Strike not heal? Similarly to if you parry it. Or if you block a demon hunter's attacks during his metamorphosis, does he not leech if those attacks are blocked? These are a couple synergies that I really want to test out. If that's the case, it still just as a nice little emergency, flip over to a sword and board and then start blocking a lot of attacks. Shattering Throw is coming back, and I mean, this thing is so good for warriors because you were limited in your compositions because paladins, bubble, divine shield, or blessing of protection, ice block for mages, so many of these immunities that you just couldn't get through unless you had someone else in your team to deal with it. It's coming back so you can deal with it. It opens up the table to so many more composition options. And it's interesting that it says it deals up to 500% increased damage to absorb shields. So would this include Rapture Power Word shields? It might be a really heavy hitting attack, or maybe against a mage with Blazing Barrier, or if they're running the Legendary to get all 3 barriers, you can just crack through the absorbs in their defense and get a huge burst of damage. There's some big potential there for Shattering Throw. And then Spell Reflection coming back baseline for Arms Warrior rather than just being an honor talent. So now it will be available in PvE and PvP baseline. However, I believe it's not the same power level, so it's not just an immunity to all spells for the duration. It lasts 5 seconds, but as soon as the spell hits you, it's gone. So it's the high skill cap version of Spell Reflection, but you do still get a benefit of just reducing magic damage on yourself. Again, extra utility for the Arms Warrior in general, and it is so awesome to see a lot of these spells come back. And those are all baseline for warriors. So if you're wondering about Fury, the Fury Warrior will get all of those as well. Arms is now also getting Piercing Howl, which at first glance I was thinking, they already have Hamstring. Do they really need another one? And then I re-looked at it and it says 70% slow. Hamstring's only 50%. So you get a super powered slow from Piercing Howl, and it hits the whole team. So if they're about to escape from your Blade Storm, you drop a Piercing Howl, then go for the Blade Storm. Or if you're fighting trash pulls in a dungeon where the monsters run away when they're low health, save this for right before they're about to run away, and then you're going to prevent them from running too much of a distance and maybe aggroing some extra monsters. So excellent extra utility there for a warrior navigating between the hamstrings or the Piercing Howl to just slow targets and prevent them from escaping. We're not seeing any real changes to the talent trees here, but there will be some synergies with the legendaries when I get to the legendary portion. I do anticipate in PvE that Skull Splitter becomes mandatory because generating rage with so much low haste is going to be quite difficult. You may notice some dead time in your rotation where you're just waiting to generate rage. So I would imagine that Skull Splitter becomes a little bit more desirable in that regard. I'm curious to see if there are synergies with Sudden Death and then the Venthyr ability that replaces Execute. There could be some exciting synergies there. And then there are legendaries that interact with things like Impending Victory, legendaries that could interact hugely with Bounding Stride, and we'll get to those a little bit, but generally speaking, the talents haven't changed. I don't anticipate that the priority of what was best for our dungeons will change too much either, unless we see more additional legendary effects or conduit effects. There are a couple of honor talents that are new to the table here for Arms Warrior, so that's exciting. We've got Overwatch, so when you intervene an ally, they gain Spell Reflect for 5 seconds, so not only just intervening a blind, maybe you intervene a Greater Pyroblast and then Spell Reflect it back to the mage. There's a lot of annoying things you could do here. Or Polymorph, you intervene to your healer and then reflect the Polymorph to them. This thing could be awesome for Arms Warrior in terms of its potential. I love Intervene. I don't know how many more times I can say it. Demolition is just reducing the cooldown of Shattering Throw, because right now I believe, it's really long. So it's only 3 minutes. That lines up generally with immunity cooldowns. Although if you're fighting a Frost Mage, maybe you'd want we get a little bit faster with the Cold Snap to get through 2 Ice Blocks, or you get through 2 Blessing and Protections if it's that much of a priority. But just some general cooldown reduction. And then this one, which seems really interesting, I'm curious to see how it ends up playing out, is Guillotine. So just swinging your axe towards the target, and then I don't think it's actually working yet. So you wind your weapon up, and after 1.5 seconds, you execute all nearby enemies. And I'm curious if that will synergize with the Venthyr ability, if it's replaced with it, because the Venthyr Execute also applies, you'll take less damage after you use that version of Execute. So if Guillotine has synergy with the Venthyr Covenant replacement for Execute, this thing could be sick, or it could just be phrased to Execute. And I would assume this is below 10% health. They die instantly. So you just get this big wind up hit. It's possible that 10% is too low for this to actually be competitive. You may already just be able to kill them with normal execute at that point. But it's nice to see that they are acknowledging Arms Warriors kind of have been limp when it comes to finishing the job. So hopefully this will help them in that regard and return some of that kind of really heavy hitting firepower in terms of PvP. And now, as they've reset the beta, I'm just pulling up Wowhead here. Great resource just to find information about the game, to take a peek at the legendaries, some of the covenant abilities, and the soul binds. So the first one that jumps off the page to me, and that's a pun, you know, because leap. Yeah, okay. You get 2 charges of heroic leap, and again with that boundless stride, reducing the cooldown of heroic leap. I could see this being amazing for some raid bosses where you need to get from one side of a boss room to the other to get to adds to maximize your damage. I do worry that you're going to outrun your raid and you're going to outrun your group to the point where it's like, whoa, I got to this pull, but now I'm the only one here. Now I'm going to die because I'm getting hit. So maybe it's excessive and maybe it's overkill. Now, if you're in a random battleground and you just want to get around the fight immediately, I mean, this thing's amazing. Or if you're in an arena and you're fighting an arcane mage, and let's be real here, warriors absolutely despise arcane mages. It's just not, that's not a good relationship. I don't think they even talk to each other anymore in specializations. So you would be able to hunt down arcane mages. You could run some of the covenant abilities, which we'll get to, that would also dampen down a lot of the mage's potential to escape. Misshapen Mirror spell reflection lasts 200% longer. Not really too relevant because it will dissipate after it reflects one spell, but it applies to your party, so you can get mass spell reflect with this one. You can get the intervene spell reflect for your partner and make your spell reflect mass spell reflect. Really big outplay potential against mages I see so far, and then heavy hitting spell attacks like Chaos Bolt or Greater Pyroblast, which, I mean, in the current iteration of the game would be great to see if it's as potent as it would be in Battle for Azeroth moving into Shadowlands. Seismic Reverberation if you're Whirlwind or Revenge, so for prot, hits 3 or more enemies, it then hits an additional time. Really great for AoE on trash pulls. I would anticipate that these two maybe they're not that great for you in terms of PvE. You just want numbers, increasing your numbers, while AoE hitting an additional time is great for increasing your numbers. Signet of Tormented Kings, activating Bladestorm, or if you talent Ravager, if you're Fury, Recklessness, or Avatar, randomly cast one of the other 2 abilities at a reduced effectiveness. So if you Avatar, it'll Bladestorm. If you Bladestorm, it'll Avatar. This kind of would make you have to talent into Avatar unless it's not talking about Arms Avatar. So interesting there. I would imagine it is talking about Arms Avatar. So this would be great for just bonus damage during your Bladestorm windows. But other than that, would it overall in terms of sustain work out better than this? The dangers is that you're going to break crowd control. You don't really want to be randomly proccing Bladestorm potentially in a moment where you want to interrupt something and you have to cancel it anyway. There's a lot of drawbacks to this, and in PvE as well. What if you got a crowd controlled monster next to your group pull? It seems a bit risky to be using this legendary just in general. Enduring Blow, your Mortal Strike has a 15% chance to apply Colossus Smash. Really great. Colossus Smash is probably your number one damage increasing ability. So just getting a chance to proc that on a target seems like a really good legendary overall if you're going for something to play in all content, and possibly also very good just for Mythic Plus. It would be great for 2-target cleave with Sweeping Strikes. It might synergize with Sharpened Blade in PvP. Seems like a really good legendary. Battle Lord, your slam has a 30% chance to reset the cooldown of Mortal Strike. You're already pretty rage starved at the moment, so I'm worried that this legendary might not get too much value, but again, it's still just extra damage. We got Exploiter. Execute causes the target to take 25% more damage from your next Mortal Strike, stacking up to 2 times. You go for some really big Sharpened Blades in PvP, or maybe go for a Sweeping Strikes, Mortal Strike onto 2 targets with this build. Seems pretty good for a 2-target cleave or PvP. Unhinged, while Ravager or Bladestorm is active, you automatically cast a total of 1 or 2 Mortal Strikes at random nearby enemies, some extra damage during Bladestorm. It's a good time to get it. Or maybe if you Bladestorm right as your Mortal Strike effect is ending in PvP, it reapplies the healing reduction. So this could be good for PvP, possibly not competing as much as some of the other AoE legendaries potentially. And again, it's going to be about tuning and testing to determine the absolute output when it comes to PvE. But there are some clear winners when it comes to potential for PvP for the legendaries. So looking good overall. When we move over to the Covenant abilities, we've got the Kyrian. We've got the Spear of Bastion, and this seems like a really fun ability. I'm not sure how viable it will end up being in dungeons if it doesn't do too much damage, but basically you just throw a spear down, and anytime they try and escape, they get monsters or players will get pulled back in. Again, great anti-mage in dungeons. Once again, describing that situation where mobs might be running away when they're low health, or maybe there's a mechanic where they try and run away to go get extra help, even at higher health margins. You could use this to hold them in place. You could also just use it to do damage. It applies a dot, and they're all going to stay next to you. So set up for a big blade storm if the enemy team stacks up. Maybe a war breaker, spear of bastion, blade storm, maybe even spec ravager, drop down huge AoE. This seems like a lot of fun for just solo pulls and going for big damage. Right now, the biggest downside for Kyrian, at least in PvP, is that the Vial of Serenity is not usable in PvP, but I can only imagine it's because it's flagged as a consumable, which aren't usable in Arena. So as long as it gets a secondary flag, I feel like it should be usable in Arena or in PvP. So you get that Vial to heal yourself. Great for warriors, as in historically they've been lacking sustain. So hopefully that will change, and then you obviously talent to amplify the effects of that healing Vial. Moving over to the Venthyr, and this is the one I was talking about, Condemn. It replaces Execute. Curious to see if it has synergies with the talents that also include Execute, because not only is it going to be doing a lot of damage, and you can use it when targets are above 80% health as well as below 20%, then they do less damage to you, and you can run conduits to increase the amount of or increase the decreased amount of damage that they'll do to you. So it's really great in terms of personal defensives. And Venthyr obviously get the Door of Shadows for some extra mobility. They get some extra snare reduction as well through their talents for PvP. I should bring that up for Kyrian as well. You'll get reductions in polymorph, reductions in stuns if you stand still. So if you got Frost Nova and you're stuck, you stand still, and the mage polymorphs you, that polymorph is then reduced by 30%. So this could be like really good anti-mage in PvP. I'm not sure if it's going to really be too much of an issue in PvE in terms of getting that crowd control benefit. You're likely going for throughput in terms of the soul binds. But for Venthyr, you then get the snare reductions, which will allow you to move more. I'm curious if it pairs up with the troll racial. We got a troll on the little video, so you could get even more snare reductions. Maybe snares don't even last very long on you at all. Paired up with the Stefu's legendary that reduces crowd control even further. And then, of course, you get Door of Shadows. Play that Heroic Leap legendary. You play Door of Shadows. I mean, you're like 2 demon hunters in 1 spec. I don't know if it's going to stay the way that it is right now, because that seems really bonkers. Necro Lord here is going to get the Conqueror's banner, so you can just place the banner down, and it's going to be, well, while you don't have it down, you just move faster and you get a little bit of glory. But when you place it down, you get a big benefit. You get 20% maximum health and 50% increased attack speed. Again, I was talking about the synergies with Wind Fury Totem. A chance to proc extra auto attacks, and then get this attack speed buff, and then play with the enhancement shaman that bloodlusts you. I feel like there's some really good synergies between enhancement and arms warrior in PvE and PvP. So potentially we see that come back as a composition as well, and this would be a great way to synergize with it, or if you're planning to play with melee classes in general. If you weren't planning to play with melee classes in PvP like arenas, this might fall a little bit short of the other ones in terms of its utility. And then the same thing kind of goes for dungeons too. Depending on the output of this, because their other signature ability, at least in PvE, isn't that great, just an absorb shield, some of the other soul binds are going to have to make up, because right now I'm kind of sold as Venthyr or Kyrian for the AoE, and then Venthyr for single target, which is probably just a safer pick overall in all aspects of the game. And then Necrolord, if it gets synergy, seems like it would be really good, but if it doesn't get synergy, I'm worried it might fall behind, and that's going to continue on with testing, obviously. They did nerf Fleshcraft in terms of its final form crowd control immunity, so now it's only crowd control immunity while channeling it, and you can be interrupted, so you get interrupted and then you're crowd controllable. But if you finish the channel, you'll also be uncrowd controllable for 4 seconds afterwards. There's a higher skill cap added to it, but because there's a higher skill cap added to it, it makes it a bit more difficult of a choice when Venthyr get passive crowd control reductions in their interrupts, and Kyrian get passive crowd control reductions for polymorphs. It might just kind of fall off. I'm a bit worried for Necrolord now overall. Moving down to Night Fae, which could be the best Mythic plus one. You're going to get access to potentially a cheat death through one of the soul binds. And then you also get Shockwave, which is just great for an AoE stun. And AoE stuns are king when it comes to trash pulls. You just disrupt multiple targets, and it's great for lockdown. And it also looks like it does a ton of damage and some nice rage generation. So this Night Fae in general could be your best Mythic Plus go-to. In PvP, 1.5 seconds is really bad. You're going to put them on stun diminishing return for better stuns like Stormbolt. So there's really big drawbacks to this in PvP, unfortunately. But if you're just focusing on PvE solely and Mythic Plus more particularly, this could be a great addition, especially if the team that you're running with in dungeons doesn't have an AoE stun. I mean, are you really running a serious dungeon team if your team doesn't have one? And then you also get soul shapes, so be able to get some extra mobility. And there's conduits that also give it damage reduction if it was absolutely necessary. But I think Night Fae is mostly the utility of an AoE stun and potentially a cheat death. That's going to conclude the covenants. When we jump into the potenties, and wow, this is a lot of text to just sort through. Execute increases the critical strike chance of execute by 3% for 8 seconds, stacking up to 6 times. And do remember these rank up. So these are just the base effects that get even stronger. So you could be getting up to a 100% critical strike of your next execute. And this might have synergies with the other Covenant abilities, right? So does it synergize with Condemn? If it does, all these synergizing effects could make Venthyr one of the best. And now that Necrolords don't have that crowd control immunity, it's leading me to believe that that is going to be the case. The other conduits, these are like sockets you put into your little conduit talent window. Overpower has a 6% chance to apply Colossus Smash. Once again, really good for just getting off time on Colossus Smash. There's other legendaries that we were talking about that has a chance to apply Colossus Smash. So maybe you can get a build to the point where the target always has Colossus Smash. That seems really good. Merciless Bone Grinder Slam. Critical strikes reduce the remaining cooldown of Ravager and Blade Storm. Some extra cooldown reduction if you're going to be running Anger Management. It could be really good, especially Rage Generation is difficult, but I'm not super excited about that one initially as a PvP player because critical strikes are already undervalued and you don't generally desire crit, so your chances of critting slam is going to be not too high. Now in PvE, if the throughput of Blade Storm ends up being really high and you're using slam a lot, then obviously I see this having a ton of potential in PvE. Mortal Combo. Mortal Strike has a 15% chance to hit an additional time. Once again, really good synergies with the legendaries to apply Colossus Smash or to increase the damage of your next Mortal Strike with the Exploiter. Stack it up 2 times. Get the Conduit. Has a chance to hit an additional time. Bolster that up in PvP with a Sharpened Blade. Maybe you just cut somebody's head off. I mean, this has massive single target burst written all over it. So if you need to kill a specific trash monster really fast, having the chance of this, which I think would increase as you rank it up, makes this pretty nuts to me, or at least stands out a lot to me. When we look at these are like the Covenant conduits, so these are the sockets that will buff your Covenant ability. This one targeting Spirit of Bastion from Kyrian. The instant damage and Rage Generation are increased by 20%. Really good. Just extra damage, and Rage Generation is already hard to come by. So I mean, to me, this seems like the most fun ability. If I was just looking at fun, throw the spear down, nobody gets to escape. You just pound away at them. Maybe play with Death Knight, they pull them in. Maybe play Necrolord, and they just got grips on grips on grips on grips. Screw mages. All right, that's the build right there, at least in PvP. In PvE also, it just guarantees the monsters stay clumped up. There are a lot of trash pulls. I'm thinking of a Tal Dazar where just the little, what are they, pterodactyls start just flying all over the place. They're super annoying, so this would remove that, and you may be desirable running the Kyrian just because of that for those specific dungeons if those types of mechanics continue to exist, which I feel like, why wouldn't they? Condemns damage dealt and prevented are increased by 8% for each nearby enemy, up to 40%. So you could reduce the damage someone does to you by 40% with Condemn. That seems really strong in PvP. And now I'm even sold more on those extra utility abilities coming back to arms for PvE, because maybe you condemn the boss or a trash pull and then AoE taunt them, because you get an AoE taunt as you level up through Shadowlands, and then jump into a defensive stance with a shield block, and you become the temporary backup tank for a specific pull if maybe they're stacking up too high on necrotic, or there's some sort of mechanic that they're going to get one tap by the next hit that hits them. You could reduce all the damage and soak the hit yourself. I feel like there's a lot of potential there if you want to be the kind of the hero arms warrior, although you'll probably get the tank going, I'm the tank, I'm supposed to tank, don't do that. If you get that player, don't add them to your friends list. It's not worth your time. Veterans Repute. Brandishing the Conqueror's banner immediately grants you 5 glory, and while the banner is planted, your strength isn't. So this does exactly what I was worried about, the Necrolord Covenant not being able to benefit you personally too much, but getting 12% strength seems really solid, especially in PvE. Maybe a little bit less so depending on if the PvP scaling system continues to exist in Shadowlands. So main stats might not be too much of a priority in PvP. And then destructive reverberations, ancient aftershocks cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds. So you just get that extra big shockwave hit. Again, it's just putting you on stun DR in PvP, so it doesn't really help you out too much. But in Mythic Plus, if you're the stunner, or you just want to be using it as an AoE interrupt, if anything, it's going to get a lot of benefit with that regard. So it's tough. It's tough to make a decision here in terms of what's going to be the best. I'm going to have to play through it a little bit more, test it out, see what other people are saying and what they're testing to decide what's actually like the best. But the main purposes of going through this kind of first look at Arms Warrior was mostly just, is it going to be fun? Am I going to be able to play this for the duration of the expansion and still have a good time? And I think absolutely yes. Everything has come back to the specialization that I wanted. There's some interesting kind of cutesy, cheeky stuff that's also coming back that they've added in terms of new stuff. You're going to get a little bit more sustainability through the builds now, and some of the passives are brought back. So I think there's huge dueling potential, outplay potential in PvP. I am worried output-wise competitively, because our haste is plummeting so much, that Fury becomes the best spec again in PvE in terms of output, and that's usually all that matters in PvE, unfortunately. But it could still be a good substitution, and maybe we see some synergies between Enhancement and Arms Warrior that allow both of those specializations to compete with those, those annoying Demon Hunters and Outlaw Rogues. Like, who likes them? Who likes them? So maybe some synergies between specs will allow more competitive viability for the Arms Warrior specialization early on in Shadowlands. So I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please like and leave a comment down below on your thoughts for Arms Warrior. If you're going to be playing it moving forward, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, as it does help me out greatly. And you can be notified when my videos go live, as I'm uploading every day, at least one video, and possibly even more depending on the content release here of the beta moving into Shadowlands. The purposes of this channel, once again, to be a resource for everybody to make the correct decision in terms of their gameplay for Shadowlands, because you got a lot of decisions and a lot of choices that for the most part appear to be quite permanent or really annoying and difficult to go back on once you make them. So it is very important that you do your research, and I can help you do the research here on the channel and just provide it to you through these videos. So thank you very much for watching, and we will see you in the next one.